Number 10. Ted Bundy. One of the most famous killers of all time right off the hop. Here we go. Ted Bundy. He killed upwards of 30 people during his crime spree in the 1970s. Now, most interviews with Ted are extremely well known. We've watched them and been shocked and sick to our stomach, dare I say. But there's one interview that's very disturbing that's not quite as popular as the others. In this interview, he's talking about taking the life of an 18-year-old student named Georgianne Hawkins. Now, the chilling part of it, of course, other than the matter at hand, is how he talks about these things just so matter-of-factly, almost like it's a casual conversation between friends and not him, describing the most horrific acts that he committed.
At this point, she was quite lucid, talking about things. It's funny, it's not funny, but it's odd the kinds of things people say under those circumstances.
Now, of course, over on Netflix, you can pick a number of installments involving Ted Bundy. There's Conversations with a Killer. There's a movie called Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile with Zac Efron. So choose your fate. Either way, it's chilling stuff. This is dark history.
In our number 9 spot today, we have Richard Ramirez. Richard, who is also known as the Night Stalker, was a serial killer who terrorized the streets of Los Angeles in the 1980s. He was known for his MO of invading homes, which left him initially being dubbed as the walk-in killer, but he had another signature that was concerning to many people at the time. Richard was known for leaving behind different satanic messages at the scene of his crimes. Because of his satanic signature, after he left his first pentagram at the scene of a crime, authorities became worried that he was a Charles Manson copycat, but instead he was just his very own kind of monster. It is said that he would leave more pentagrams behind while also telling his victims to swear to Satan instead of God. During his court appearances, he would hold up a pentagram, and after pleading not guilty, he said, "Hail Satan."
Number 8. Don't f with cats. When I say that this was one of the most captivating documentaries I've ever seen, I really mean that. I was late to the party. I watched it long after its release because I was like, I don't really want to see any of that happen. But from the moment I started this, I could not stop until I was done. The documentary follows the sad story of the killing of Lynn Jun, which is one of Canada's most infamous crimes ever. Now, Lynn was killed by a man named Luca Magnotta, who was already stirring up some internet buzz, who was posting some pretty horrific videos before this horrible crime even happened. As the title hints towards, he was with some cats. The documentary follows a couple of unbelievable cyber sleuths who saw Luca's messed up videos and who were intent on finding out who he was, where he was, why this is happening before, it got worse, which it did. Now, the crimes themselves are absolutely horrible the whole way through. It's dark, it's really hard to watch, but the story is almost unbelievable. But the work that these cyber sleuths do is incredible. It's definitely worth the watch. You see someone, I don't want to spoil it, but like you see someone get busted by internet wizards. It's amazing. The documentary really has it all if you're a true crime person. It's really hard to watch because of how tragic it is, but again, it's worth it in the end. You see them catch them. Psycho. Number 7. Warren Jeffs. Warren Jeffs is the president of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ in the Latter-day Saints and is also serving a life plus 20-year sentence, which is exactly what he should be getting. That's horrible. I would definitely make it more if I could, but I don't have that power, do I? His father was once the president of the cult, but when he passed, the position was passed on to young Warren. As a new leader of the polygamous cult, he said that no one should ever attempt to marry one of his father's widows. But then just a few days later, he himself married all of them except 2 because one refused and then was banned from ever marrying again, and the other just simply ran away. Yeah, if your marriage proposal causes someone to flee a cult that they're in, you're clearly not the one. You're doing something wrong here, dare I say. Warren had the power to assign who would marry who and all that horrible stuff, but he was also able to punish a man by taking his wives and children and assigning them to another man. Just another family to another person. It's psychotic. As a man, you have to have at least 3 wives in order to get into heaven. That was the rule. That was his holy golden rule. But the more wives, the more likely it would be that you got into heaven, so this led to this horrible fate. In 2005, the Texas authorities conducted a raid and took legal custody of 416 young individuals, and in 2006, Warren was arrested for being the worst human garbage imaginable and is still serving his sentence today. There's so much more to this case that we don't have time to cover on this, short YouTube video, but there is a documentary released called Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey, which I would fully recommend if you want to know more about this case. Number 6, Richard Iceman Kuklinski. Richard Kuklinski got his name in the most gruesome way possible. He became one of America's most prolific killers after being hired by the famous Five families in New York City. Now, he had around a 30-year career as a contract killer, and while he only ended up being charged and convicted for 4 killings, he had claimed that the number was actually closer to 250. This is insane. When we think of what an assassin would look like, he may not be at the top of the list, right? More than fair, which may partially be what helped him be so successful in getting away with such horrible crimes. While he killed his victims in a multitude of ways, he was dubbed the Iceman due to the fact that he froze all of the bodies. Now, he did this to ensure that the coroners would be unable to determine their true time of death. Now, Richard, he's actually not still serving his sentence. Richard ended up passing away in jail in 2006. Yeah, we know that time of death. That one we do know. We know that one very well. The Iceman, Netflix, dark stuff. Check it out. Number 5, Jeffrey Dahmer. Yeah, Jeffrey's one of the most well-known serial killers, with his crimes taking place from 1978 to 1991. His crimes are much too brutal and horrific to detail on this channel right now, but he's known for taking the lives of 17 different people. I'll say that. Now, at his trial, not only did he plead not guilty, but his attorney had some interesting words for the court. We love when that happens. His attorney stated that his bloody pattern had caused him to believe that he was the devil, which was intended to bolster his insanity plea. His attorney said that he became enamored, overwhelmed, dare I say, caught up in the character from The Exorcist 3. Said character was Satan because he was the, personification of evil. Sure, not only was Jeffrey found to be sane and ended up being sentenced to multiple life sentences prison, but not too long after his sentence started, he was killed by a fellow inmate. Nice, I wonder if the devil made him do it. Wouldn't that be ironic? The Netflix movie starring America's sweetheart, Evan Peters, is titled Monster Dahmer. It's pretty good, check that one out as well. And the Jeffrey Dahmer story leaves that part out. It was a dark ending for an evil person, but they leave out the fact that he died. So, spoilers, but you should know this going in, it helps. Number 4, Richard Ramirez. Also known as the Night Stalker, with a Netflix documentary under the same name. Richard Ramirez was a serial killer who terrorized the streets of Los Angeles back in 1980s, okay? He was known for invading homes, which actually initially dubbed him as the walk-in killer, but he had another signature that was concerning to many people, especially during the height of the satanic panic. Yeah, Richard was known for leaving behind different satanic messages at the scene of all of his crimes. That's like the worst thing I've ever heard. Because of his satanic signature, after he left his first pentagram at the scene of a crime, authorities became worried that he was a Charles Manson copycat, which more than fair. We don't want another one of those. Holy But instead, he was just his own kind of individual, dare I say, unique monster. So nice. Doing it his own way. Awesome. It is said that he would leave more pentagrams behind while also telling his victims to swear to Satan instead of swearing to God. So yeah, just a lunatic. During his court appearances, he would hold up a pentagram, and after pleading not guilty, he said, "Hail Satan." So yeah. I would say the devil, but yeah, he's literally the devil. Yeah. Number 3, Unabomber, in his own words. The description of this Netflix series says, anchored by a rare interview, this docuseries details Ted Kaczynski's path from a young intellectual to one of the most feared people in US history. And the series really just does that. Ted Kaczynski is most often referred to as the Unabomber due to the atrocious crimes that he committed. He was also known as being quite bright from a young age, and it's believed that he had an IQ of around 167. He was accepted into Harvard at the age of just 16, and he went on to receive a PhD at only age 25. Things were looking bright for the guy, dare I say, as he landed himself a job as an assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley, right? As I'm saying this, it's all great on paper. So far, we're like, okay, where does it get 2 years later, he resigned from said position and then obviously took a drastic and dark turn. In 1971, Ted moved to a remote cabin in Montana that had no electricity, no running water, just already a grim start. And from 1971 until 1977, Ted learned to live as a hermit, right? Off the grid style while learning different survival skills. But once 1978 rolled around, he was ready to start his terror campaign. From here until 1995, he began a nationwide attack against people who were involved with modern technology. He planted these weapons or he would mail them, and in the end, he took the lives of 3 people and severely injured 23. Ted was captured, tried, and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. So yeah, he's not mailing any more weapons or any explosives anytime soon, thank God. Number 2, Conversations with a Killer, the John Wayne Gacy tapes. With a nickname like Killer Clown, it's abundantly clear why everyone would want to stay away from this actual monster. He got his start and this horrific nickname by being a clown for children's birthday parties, charitable events, you name it, that sort of thing where you want to hire a clown you might get this guy. According to Gacy himself, all of his crimes were committed inside of his ranch house where he would lure his victims into. He would then trick them into wearing handcuffs under the pretense that he was going to show them some sort of magic trick, and then from here on, you can imagine the horror was just absolutely, I can't even talk about it on YouTube. It is thought that he took the lives of somewhere around 33 young men, most of which he buried in the crawl space of his home, and on the evening of December 11th, 1978, Gacy took the life of his last victim, Robert Piest. The following investigation, questioning, and searches led police to gather all the evidence they needed to arrest and charge him in his conviction for 33 killings at the time. The Netflix series involves recordings of Gacy discussing his crimes, and it's just absolutely chilling to hear. It's one thing to read about them, but then to actually hear them or witness them in any way, shape, or form, that's when it sits with you. Know what I mean? I'll end on a lighter note, because holy that was a horrible list to even get through, my gosh. Number 1, the Tinder Swindler. Okay, this documentary is the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. It's pretty recent too, and of course, it's on Netflix. I'll try not to spoil anything here, but the memes already went out of control. You probably know enough. The Tinder Swindler is a guy named Simon Levive. He would go on Tinder, he would date women, and then he would scam them in the most insane way. It sounds pretty bad, but hearing the story told from the victims and the way it all plays out, it gets even worse once you see it. This guy was apparently hanging out with French Montana at one point. French Montana watched this documentary and posted on his Instagram story about it only a few days after. The Tinder Swindler is directed by Felicity Morris. It's amazing. It's a roller coaster. Definitely check it out. You should watch it. You know who doesn't probably want you to watch it? Simon Levive. He probably doesn't want you to watch this. He's like still out there and still trying to scam people. It's wild. I don't want to say anything. I don't want to spoil stuff, but yeah, not as fun of an ending as other ones on this list, that's for sure.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have John Wayne Gacy. With a nickname like the Killer Clown, it is abundantly clear why everyone would want to stay away from this actual monster. He got his start in this horrifying nickname by being a clown for children's birthday parties, charitable events, and that sort of thing. According to Gacy himself, all of his crimes were committed inside of his ranch house, where he would lure his victims into. He would then trick them into wearing handcuffs under the pretense that he was going to show some sort of a magic trick, and from here the horror unfortunately ensued. It is thought that he took the lives of somewhere around 33 people, most of which he buried in the crawl space of his home. On the evening of December 11th, 1978, Gacy took the life of his last victim, Robert Piest. In the end, when Robert's mother reported him missing, the subsequent investigation, questioning, and searches led police to gather all of the evidence they needed to arrest and charge him, and his conviction for 33 killings was, at the time, the most by one individual in the United States legal history. He was sentenced to death on March 13th, 1980, and on May 10th, 1994, he was executed by lethal injection.
Number 9, The Staircase. Yes, The Staircase. This one's a classic true crime staple. One of the most widely debated cases ever, honestly. In 2001, Kathleen Peterson was sadly found dead in her home. Now, this docuseries follows the investigation and a few of the theories surrounding the case and the trial. They're pretty interesting. Kathleen was found at the bottom of her stairs at her home, and while it was originally regarded as a fatal but accidental fall that caused her passing, as the investigation unfolded, the truth got muddier and muddier. Michael has always been somewhere near the top of the suspect list, considering that he was the last one to see her alive, and he was actually home and was supposedly in the backyard when said fall occurred down the stairs. From theories of Michael's infidelities all the way to a barn owl, there's lots of speculation about this case. And this documentary is definitely one to watch if you're a true crime lover. You'll be thinking about it for a while. I'm thinking about it right now and I'm like, I don't know. I still don't know. Join in on the debate in the comments down below. Did he do it? Did he not do it? Sound off. I'm curious to see who's on Team Staircase here.
In our number 8 spot today, we have Richard Iceman Kuklinski. Richard got his nickname in the most gruesome way possible. He became one of America's most prolific killers after being hired by the famous 5 families in New York City. He had around a 30-year career as a contract killer, and while he only ended up being charged and convicted for 4 killings, he had claimed that the number was actually closer to 250. When we think of what an assassin would look like, he may not be the top of the list, which may partially be what helped him be so successful. Not only this, but while not working and committing these crimes, he was just going home to his completely unsuspecting family every day. While he killed his victims in a multitude of ways, he was dubbed the Iceman due to the fact that he froze all of the bodies. This was to ensure that the coroners would be unable to determine their true time of death, which is both clever and especially evil. Richard ended up passing away in jail in 2006. In our number 7 spot today, we have Stephen Griffiths. This is a person who is said to have idolized the Yorkshire Ripper, so I'm sure what comes next will be no surprise. Stephen was a PhD student who wanted to achieve fame, but through the most sinister way possible. Between June of 2009 and May of 2010, he would go on to take the lives of 3 separate women. His criminal history was also extremely concerning, as years ago, he had been arrested due to an unprovoked attack on a grocery store manager, and it is said that he previously stated that he saw himself becoming a serial killer. Shortly after he was arrested for his crimes, CCTV footage emerged that showed him celebrating after taking the life of his final victim. The footage showed him holding up a crossbow and giving the finger directly to the camera. It is said that Stephen pled guilty to his crimes once caught, not because he was remorseful, but because he wanted to receive the recognition for them. In our number 6 spot today, we have Keith Hunter Jesperson. Also known as the Happy Face Killer, Keith was so desperate for attention for his crimes, it might have led to his own demise. Keith is a killer who, after the body of his first victim was found, had someone else actually claim to be responsible for his crime. When you're trying to get away with killing people, having someone else falsely confess to your crime would likely seem like the best case scenario, right? Well, not for Keith. He wanted to be known for his crimes, so to help himself get media attention, he drew a smiley face on a bathroom wall hundreds of miles away from his crime scene, and here he left an anonymous letter where he confessed to the crime and provided proof. He never ended up receiving a reply, so he decided to write more letters to the media and to the authorities, each signed with a smiley face. In the end, Keith was initially caught after he became the prime suspect in the death of his girlfriend at the time. Previously, his victims had been people he had no connection to, so this was truly the mistake the authorities needed to catch him. Keith then admitted to his crimes, and while he has been formally linked to 8 deaths, he has confessed to somewhere around 185. Keith was tried and sentenced to life without parole for his heinous crimes, and he remains in prison at Oregon State Penitentiary. In our number 5 spot today, we have James Holmes. James is the man behind the 2012 Aurora, Colorado shooting that took the lives of 12 people and injured 70 others at the Century 16 movie theater. Shortly after the crime spree, he was arrested and held without bail while he awaited trial on an accepted plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. I just want to make it very clear that insanity doesn't apply to every mental illness, of course. James was severely mentally ill, but the court has the job of deciding whether or not that illness made him unable to tell right from wrong. That is what his defense had to prove. Things were admitted to the court, such as his notebooks and journals, as well as testimony from 2 separate psychologists who spent 22 and 25 hours with him, and both diagnosed him with a serious mental illness, but both also stated that in their professional opinion, he knew right from wrong. After a tumultuous trial, he did end up being found guilty. The jury could have given him the death sentence, but on account of his illness, they decided that that would be inappropriate, so in the end he was sentenced to 12 life sentences without parole and an additional 3,318 years. In our number 4 spot today, we have Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. This is a double whammy because unfortunately both of these people are still alive, but the good news is that at least one of them, Paul, is still in jail. This horrible pair are often referred to as the Ken and Barbie killers, and while Paul started off living a life of crime, he quickly brought Karla into it as well after they met. That is not to say that she is not just as guilty as him, however, because they are both fully responsible for their own actions. While Paul was arrested for a multitude of crimes, the pair were arrested and convicted of taking the lives of 3 separate people, one of them being Karla's own sister. See what I meant about them both being responsible for their crimes? They both suck. The investigation into the crimes proved to be quite difficult, with authorities having plenty of hoops to jump through, and this is why a plea deal was created for Karla. She had 1 week to accept or decline the deal, which would give her a sentence of 12 years for her full cooperation. She accepted. Both were convicted in 2005, and Paul was up to apply for parole in 2018, and in October of that year, he was denied parole. His next parole hearing was just over a year ago on June 22nd of 2021, and it only took 1 hour of deliberation to decide to turn down that application as well. I think 30 seconds probably would have been enough to decide, but I'm just glad the outcome was the same. Karla, on the other hand, served her 12-year sentence and then was released. Like, years ago. She moved away from Canada and headed to Costa Rica for a while with her new husband and children, if you can believe that, but unfortunately she has since moved back. In our number 3 spot today, we have Joanna Dennehy. This is the person responsible for a series of killings and attack that took place in March 2013. Joanna is a very cold and heartless person and has on many occasions been said to laugh at her crimes and the lives she took, even still behind bars. After the first of her crimes, authorities launched a manhunt for her, and they used CCTV CCTV footage to help track her down. She was finally caught after attacking 2 dog walkers who, thanks to immediate medical intervention, were able to survive. There are many things to say about this story that makes it exceptionally chilling, and it seems as though most people Joanna encounters are left with quite an impression of what a horrible person she is. On the day she was sentenced, it is reported that the judge, Mr. Justice Spencer, said, quote, "Although you pleaded guilty, you've made it quite clear you have no remorse." He went on to say, quote, "You are a cruel, calculating, selfish, and manipulative serial killer." After this, he sentenced her to a whole life order, or life in prison without parole, and it is said that she smiled and laughed at this. Since her time in prison, she is said to have planned escape attempts that involve the killing of a prison guard and other terrifying ideas. In our number 2 spot today, we have Franklin Dwayne Alix. Franklin is a man who had quite an insane crime spree that lasted for about 6 months in the 1990s. Although short, it was anything but sweet. The spree started off in August of 1997 in Houston, Texas. Over the course of this spree, Franklin took the lives of at least 3 people. He committed robberies, he harmed people, he attempted to take more lives, where thankfully the people survived. He kidnapped people. Literally any serious crime he could commit during those 6 months, he was doing it. In the end, Franklin was caught and put on trial for his crime spree. He did receive a sentence of death, which was carried out on March 30th, 2010. In our number 1 spot today, we have Dale Hausner and Samuel Dietman. Known as the serial shooters, the crimes these guys committed are definitely on the list of fears I have, which I'm pretty sure spawned from a Criminal Minds episode. These two were actively committing these crimes between May of 2005 and August of 2006, and basically they were arsonists who would randomly set fire to objects, but they would also drive around and commit random drive-by shootings. That's the really scary part. The fire thing is also bad, don't get me wrong, but there's just something about completely random violence that really terrifies me. In the end, a series of tips is what led investigators to identify the perpetrators of these horrible crimes, in particular one from a friend of Samuel, who explained that Sam had actually confessed to some of the killings one night while drinking. In Dale's trial, he was found guilty of 80 out of the 87 felony charges that were brought forth, and that was all in one single trial. The charges included the killings and the attempted killings he had done, arson, animal cruelty, and drive-by shootings. In the end, he was sentenced to death 6 times, and his brother, who was later found out to have assisted in some of the crimes, was sentenced to 25 years. Samuel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While Dale sat on death row, he apparently asked to be put to death, quote, as soon as possible, and in the end, in 2013, he decided to take his own life. Samuel remains in prison. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Christopher Scarver. It makes total sense to start this list off with Christopher today, and you'll soon see why. On June 1st, 1990, Christopher showed up at the Wisconsin Conservation Corps Training Program office, and there he demanded money from the man he found. When the man only gave him $15, Christopher went on to shoot him. Christopher then went and demanded money from another man and continued to shoot the man he had already shot until this second man gave him money. Christopher was caught and convicted for this atrocious crime, but his story does not end here. On November 28th, 1994, Christopher was assigned work detail with 2 other inmates. One was Jesse Anderson, who had taken the life of his own wife, and the other was none other than Jeffrey Dahmer. Well, when the 3 were left alone, Christopher took a bar from a piece of equipment in the exercise room, and that was used to basically beat and kill the other 2. I'm not gonna lie, there's no excuse and no reason for any of the crimes that any of these people committed, including these ones, but there is a very weird sort of poetic justice to that. Christopher was tried again for these 2 crimes and received 2 more life sentences. In our number 9 spot today, we have Ted Kaczynski. Ted Kaczynski is most often referred to as the Unabomber due to the atrocious crimes that he committed. He was known as being quite bright from a young age, and it is believed that he had an IQ of about 167. He was accepted into Harvard at the age of just 16, and he went on to receive a PhD. At 25, things were still looking bright for the guy, as he had landed himself a job as an assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley, but 2 years later he resigned from that position, and his life took quite a drastic and dark turn. In 1971, it is said that Ted moved to a remote cabin in Montana that had no electricity or running water. From 1971 until 1977, Ted learned to live a hermit, off-the-grid lifestyle while learning different survival skills, but once 1978 rolled around, he was ready to start his terror campaign. From here until 1995, he began a nationwide bombing against people who were involved with modern technology. He planted these weapons or would mail them, and in the end took the lives of 3 people and severely injured 23. Just like many of these kinds of people, his own ego ego and delusions got in the way, because on April 24th, 1995, he sent an anonymous handwritten letter that was addressed to the police via the New York Times. His own brother ended up recognizing his handwriting, however, and that's the tip that he gave to the FBI. Ted was captured, tried, and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. In our number 8 spot today, we have David Parker Ray. Often referred to as the Toy Box Killer, this guy is anything but fun. This serial killer's nickname comes from how he soundproofed a semi-trailer in which he called his toy box, and he equipped it full of everything a nightmare human would need to commit his horrific crimes. Here's the thing, although he was highly suspected of taking lives, there was never enough evidence to prove it because the bodies were never found. This means that although many people are quite sure that he did such things, he has never officially been tried for it. He was, however, tried and convicted for kidnapping as well as for harming those that he had taken. He would sometimes include his wife in these instances, she was a willing participant, and then many of those he took he would later drop off on the side of a road somewhere after using barbiturates in an attempt to destroy their memories that could potentially identify him. Whether he took any lives or not, I suppose is still up for debate, but that does not mean he is in any way better than anyone else on this list. He is equally as horrible of a person. In the end, David was convicted for his crimes, which is thought to be up in the range of about 60 instances, and in 2002 he died of a heart attack in prison. In our number 7 spot today, we have the River City Ripper. One of the most terrifying things that exists are serial killers who are still on the loose, especially when you find out that they've been pretty recently active. This serial killer is wanted in connection to 4 different incidents that occurred in Little Rock, Arkansas, 3 of which were fatal. These horrific crimes took place between August of 2020 and April of 2021, and despite one of the victims thankfully surviving the attack and being able to provide a description of the assailant, there is still very little to go on in terms of being able to identify who this person is. The FBI was contacted shortly after the survivor was able to give a testimony to authorities, and their behavioral analysis team created a profile of this unidentified killer. These crimes are terrible any way you spin them, but one of the most terrifying part that they were just random acts of violence that occurred completely unprovoked. The case has gained quite a bit of attention, but still, the monster remains at large. In our number 6 spot today, we have Arthur Shawcross. This man is also known as the Genesee River Killer, and his crime spree began in 1972. In trying to navigate these online guidelines, I can't exactly say who he specifically targeted, but what I will say is that while everyone on this list is particularly horrible, Arthur's were some of the worst kind of crimes, if you catch my drift. This story, however, is a little unlike some of the others today because after his first 2 crimes, he was apprehended, but for some insane reason they allowed him to have a plea bargain where he was allowed to plead guilty to just 1 charge of only manslaughter, for which he served 14 years of his 25-year sentence. In the least surprising turn of events, once he was released on early probation, his real crime spree got started. He would go on to take the lives of 12 women from 1988 to 1989. Thankfully, he was finally caught for these crimes and sent right back to prison. Of course, his initial early release was the subject of huge controversy, rightfully so, and Dr. Michael H. Stone, professor of psychiatry at Columbia University, called his early release, quote, one of the most egregious examples of the unwarranted release of a prisoner. In the end, Arthur passed away in prison while serving a 250-year sentence. He passed in 2008 after suffering a heart attack. In our number 5 spot today, we have Robert Hansen. Robert is often referred to as the Butcher Baker, and his story truly is horrific. He's one of the most prolific serial killers in Alaska's history because for over a decade, he would kidnap women, bring them into the wilderness, and that is where he would then stalk them like prey. The reason he got away with his crimes for so long is because outside of these crimes, he was just a soft-spoken baker. Robert was heading to church by day and prowling the streets at night. What led to his downfall was a badass named Cindy Paulson who was able to escape from Robert and was sure to leave evidence behind. She then went to authorities and told them what happened, and this led to a search warrant for Robert's property, which is where all the evidence that they needed lied. Robert is believed to have taken the lives of at least 17 women, and in 1983 he was sentenced to 461 years and a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In our number 4 spot today, we have William Bonin. This horrible person is responsible for taking the lives of 21 young men in Southern California from May of 1979 to June of 1980. It is said that on at least 12 of these occasions he was assisted by one of his 4 known accomplices, and it is even speculated that he might be responsible for 15 more of these crimes that evidence hasn't officially been able to connect him to. He was often referred to as the Freeway Killer because of the fact that most of the bodies were found along the freeway of Southern California. The police surveilled William until they could catch him in the act, act, which they did. In the beginning, he claimed innocence, but after receiving an impassioned letter from one of the victim's mothers, which asked him to please share the location of her son's body, he confessed his guilt. But he made sure to clarify that it wasn't so that the mother could be at peace and her pain could be eased. No, of course not. Instead, he said, quote, "I was dying for a hamburger and I knew if I went out with the cop, they would get me a hamburger." At his first trial, the prosecutor described him as, quote, "the most arch-evil person who ever existed." William was convicted on 14 of his crimes and was sentenced to death. He spent 14 years on death row before his sentence was carried out in 1996. In our number 3 spot today, we have David Berkowitz. David Berkowitz, or the Son of Sam, is an American serial killer who terrorized New York from July of 1976 to July of 1977. He took the lives of 6 people and wounded 7 others, all while eluding the biggest manhunt in New York City history. He was one of those arrogant ones who leaves like little notes for the police promising to do it again. Well, his arrogant self was caught for his crimes, and he was arrested on August 10th, 1977 and was indicted for his crimes. He confessed to all of them and claimed that he was just obeying the orders of a demon that had manifested itself in the form of a dog that belonged to his neighbor. Okay, David. He was found mentally competent to stand trial and he pleaded guilty to his crimes, which left him being sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. He later admitted to making up the dog story, which like, duh, but he did say that instead he was a member of a violent satanic cult and his crimes were committed as a part of that. These claims were investigated, but no one has been able to confirm or deny them. In our number 2 spot today, we have Glenn Stewart Godwin. Man, this guy definitely has quite the story. So basically in 1980, Glenn was working in California and didn't really have too much of a criminal record. For some reason, he and his roommate, however, decided to make a plan to rob someone that they knew who was once a friend of theirs. Of course, things go awry and it turns into a botched robbery and Glenn ends up taking the life of the person they were robbing. Both Glenn and his roommate were tried and convicted for the crimes in 1983. This is not where the story ends though. In 1987, Glenn tried to escape prison and failed, and this landed him at a higher security prison, Folsom State Prison, which is maximum security. Somehow, once at this new prison, he attempted another escape, and this time he was successful. He fled to Mexico, where he tried unsuccessfully to be a part of the illegal drug trade. He was arrested again and sentenced in Mexico, and this is when American authorities began the process of getting him extradited. During that process, Glenn decided that it would be a brilliant idea to take the life of an inmate who was a member of the Mexican drug cartel, which very obviously slowed the process of extradition. This gave him time to plan another escape, which he did in 1991, and since then, he's been on the run. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Long Island serial killer. Also known as the Craigslist Ripper, the LISK is an unidentified suspect who is believed to have taken the lives of 10 to 16 people over the last 20 years. The victims so far that are known have been sex workers who used Craigslist to advertise their work. After the disappearance of Shannon Gilbert, police were searching an area along the Ocean Parkway, and that is when they began to discover the remains of the victims. The first 4 were found in December of 2010, with another 6 being found in March and April of 2011. As of December 2015, the FBI is now officially involved in the investigation. There has been a suspect in the case, but any formal charges have not been laid in terms of these crimes. The most recent evidence found in regards to these cases was a belt found at the scene of a crime, which may potentially belong to the killer. At the same time, it was announced that new scientific evidence was being used in the investigation, but these announcements came just last year, so we have yet to receive any further updates. Hopefully the case is solved quickly so that the families of the victims can receive justice and this terrible person is off the streets for good.